The smell of smoke still clung to my hair when I saw him. My husband, laughing in front of a house that wasn't ours, holding a child who looked exactly like our son at that age. 38 years of marriage collapsed in one blink. My hands were shaking. My heart refused to believe, until his voice came through the phone. "Still at the office, love. Don't wait up." That was the moment I stopped being his wife and became his reckoning, because you can survive betrayal, but you'll never forgive being erased. The night I followed the blue dot, Sydney felt like a city I didn't quite belong to anymore. The streetlights along Pacific Highway stretched into long yellow streaks across the windscreen, smearing with every blink. The wipers kept time with my heartbeat, clearing away a fine mist that had started to settle over the glass. I could still smell smoke in my hair from the canvas I'd burnt earlier that afternoon, an old painting from our early years that suddenly meant nothing. On the passenger seat, my phone lay face up, the screen glowing with a familiar map. One small blue dot moving with me, one small gray icon, waiting. Andrew's car. I'd watched that icon all evening, first in the CBD near his office, then briefly near Barangaroo, then drifting out towards the inner suburbs when he'd texted, "Late meeting. Don't wait up, love. Might crash in the office if it's too late." He'd said that before. For months now, late meetings had become their own kind of rhythm. Tuesday nights, sometimes Thursdays, a client dinner, a board catch-up, a strategy session. Words that once sounded impressive had started to feel like wallpaper covering a crack. I never thought I'd track my husband's car. That felt like something other women did. Women who screamed, threw plates, read his messages while he showered. Not me. I was the good wife, the patient one, the one who believed in privacy, in trust, in not turning love into surveillance. Except trust isn't blind, it's just slow to open its eyes. 2 weeks earlier, Ethan had come over to help me fix my laptop. We'd ended up talking in the kitchen, his hands cupped around a mug of coffee he never actually drank. "Mum," he'd said gently, "you know his car has GPS tracking, yeah? Insurance thing. If you ever feel off, you can check where he is." I remember laughing it off. "That's for people who lose their cars, love, not their husbands." He hadn't laughed. "Sometimes it's the same thing." He'd shown me anyway. How to log into the app, where to see the little icon with Andrew's number plate, how to click locate. I didn't use it. Not then. But tonight, something in his voice when he called had been slightly wrong. A tiny misstep in an otherwise flawless routine. It was the way he said, "I'll probably crash at the office. Don't worry about me," too quickly, like he'd rehearsed it in the lift. So I pressed the icon and watched his car blink in a place that definitely wasn't his office. I turned off the main road and into a narrower one lined with jacaranda trees, their bare branches scratching at the fogged-up sky. The sign read Jacaranda Street in small white letters, but it might as well have said, "This is where your life splits in two." The further I drove, the quieter it got. The city hum fell away, replaced by the soft hiss of tires on damp asphalt and the far-off bark of a dog. Houses here weren't the cramped terraces of our first years in Parramatta. These were carefully renovated homes with wide verandas and perfectly curated gardens, the kind of street you imagined families in bank ads living on. The blue dot on my phone stopped. 2 houses ahead, the little app banner told me. "Vehicle stationary." My headlights washed over the street numbers, 24, 26, 28, and then I saw it, number 30. The blue house. It wasn't really blue, not in the way kids color with crayons. It was a deep, moody cobalt weatherboard, the kind paint companies describe as something poetic like harbor dusk. White trim framed the windows and front door. A swing hung on the front veranda, swaying just slightly in the soft breeze as if someone had only recently stepped off it. My heart, which had been pounding steadily, stuttered. Andrew's silver BMW sat in the driveway like it belonged there, perfectly aligned, tucked in, as if it had parked in that spot 100 times before. I can't explain the exact feeling of seeing your husband's car outside someone else's house at night. It's not shock. Not really. It's more like standing on a beach and watching a wave you knew was coming finally rise tall enough to crush you. I slowed to a crawl, and then, a few houses down, pulled over. My fingers were slick against the steering wheel. I turned off the engine but left the radio on, the faint murmur of some late-night presenter talking about weekend footy barely filling the car. Everything in me wanted this to be a mistake. Maybe he'd given his car to someone from work. Maybe there was a client here, an emergency, a perfectly reasonable explanation that didn't end with my marriage shattered across a stranger's front garden. I sat there, engine ticking as it cooled, the GPS still showing his car icon, rock solid and smug. Just when I thought I might turn around and go home, the front door opened. The house spilled warm light onto the veranda. A woman stepped out. She wasn't dressed like someone expecting a stranger or a delivery or a plumber. She moved with that loose, comfortable ease of someone who feels safe and owned in a space. She was barefoot. Her toenails painted a pale coral that caught the light. A silk robe cinched at her waist, the fabric falling in soft folds to mid-thigh. The robe was almost the same blue as the house. The same blue Andrew once told me matched my eyes on the day he brought me a scarf home from Melbourne. Her hair was long and dark, pulled into one of those effortless low buns younger women seem to master without trying. She leaned against the white frame of the door, one hand resting on the wood, the other lifting a mug to her lips. She smiled at something inside, a soft, private smile I recognized. The kind I used to wear when Andrew came home early with takeaway tie and an apology. I held my breath. Part of me wanted to leave. Reverse quietly, pretend I'd never turned onto this street, never opened that app, never sliced open the world I'd been living in. But my body refused to move. The woman glanced back into the house and called out, her voice carrying across the wet air, light and warm. "Luca! Bedtime, mate. Come say goodnight to Mum properly." For a second there was silence. Then a flurry of small footsteps, the quick slap, slap, slap of a child running down a hallway. A little boy burst into view, 4, maybe 5. Dark, wavy hair sticking up at odd angles. A pajama top with tiny sharks on it. His laugh hit me first, bright, sharp, familiar. He ran straight past the woman and down the veranda steps, aiming for the driveway. "Aye! Slow down, mate!" a man's voice called out, warm, amused. Andrew's voice. I knew his cadence anywhere, the way his vowels rounded, the slight rasp that came after a long day of meetings, the low chuckle threaded through it. He stepped out from behind the car, keys dangling from one hand, work shirt sleeves rolled up to his forearms. No tie, top button undone, very much not in his office. Time did something strange then. The scene slowed, thickened, stretched thin like chewing gum. The boy launched himself into Andrew's arms, and Andrew scooped him up effortlessly, hands sure around the small body. He'd done that exact movement with Ethan once, in a rental car park in Cairns, lifting him up after he'd scraped his knee. I remember because I'd taken a photo, the two of them framed by palm trees. My boys, my world. The way Andrew held this child was identical. His whole face changed, softer, younger, unguarded. He pressed his nose into the boy's hair and inhaled in that greedy, affectionate way he used to inhale our children when they were small, like he could breathe them in and make them part of his own lungs. My stomach turned. The woman descended the steps and joined them, slipping an arm around Andrew's waist like it belonged there. He bent down and kissed her. Not a furtive, guilty peck, not the clumsy rush of stolen time. No. This was slow, familiar, unhurried, The kind of kiss you give someone you love when the hardest part of the day is over and the night is yours. I felt something inside me, something old and carefully built. Crack. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was recognition. The kind of recognition you get when you see your favorite painting hanging in someone else's house. That pose, that kiss, that tuck of his hand into the small of her back as he pulled her closer. They'd done this hundreds of times. This wasn't an affair. It was a life. The boy, Luca, she'd called him, wrapped his arms around Andrew's neck and whispered something in his ear. Andrew laughed again, that soft, private laugh, and said, "All right, mate, all right. One more story, then bed, yeah?" One more story. He'd said that to Ethan when he was 4, and to Chloe when she was scared of storms. One more story, then bed. My throat closed. The phone on my lap buzzed. I flinched so hard I nearly dropped it. On the screen, his name flashed. Andrew. I stared at it for a second, then swiped to answer. "Hey, love," he said, sounding slightly out of breath. "Still at the office. It's a nightmare tonight. Don't wait up. I might crash on the couch here if it runs too late." I watched him as he spoke, standing in front of the blue house, his free hand ruffling Luca's hair while the boy clung to his leg. Behind him, the woman laughed at something on the TV inside. My husband, in front of me, lying to me, while his other life glowed warm and golden behind him. I could feel my pulse in my ears. When I spoke, my voice sounded hollow. "Busy night?" I asked. "The worst," he sighed. "You in bed?" I swallowed. "Not yet. Just cleaning up. I'll lock up and head in soon." He chuckled. "Ever the neat freak? All right. Don't wait up, Maggie. Love you." Love you. I almost laughed then. It came out strangled, like a cough. "Love you," I replied automatically, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. He hung up. I watched him slide the phone into his pocket and turn back to his little family. Because that's what they were, wasn't it? A family. A woman. A child. A man who looked relieved to be there. He scooped Luca up again, the boy's arms flung around his neck. The woman leaned her head briefly against his shoulder as they turned towards the front door. For a moment, framed in the doorway with warm light behind them, they looked like the photographs couples post on Instagram. #blessed, #family, #my whole world. Then the door closed. The house swallowed them. The veranda swing moved once, twice, then stilled. I sat in the dark car, my hands welded to the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the now closed door of the blue house. My chest felt too tight, my ribs suddenly 2 sizes too small for my heart. Outside, the night carried on like nothing had happened. A car drove past slowly, tires hissing on wet bitumen. Somewhere, a TV laugh track tumbled through an open window. A possum scraped along a fence. Inside me, something was ending. I don't know how long I stayed there. Time lost its edges. At one point, I imagined myself opening the car door, walking up that pretty white path, pressing the doorbell. I pictured Andrew opening the door, his face rearranging itself as he saw me. The woman behind him holding the boy, confusion turning to realization. I saw myself saying, "Hello, I'm Maggie. I'm the wife he forgot to bury properly." In my head, it played like a scene in one of those gritty Australian dramas we binge-watched on rainy weekends. But this wasn't television. This was my life. And walking up to that door would give him the one thing he'd been stealing from me for years: control of the narrative. No, not yet. I needed to know more than just where he slept. I needed to know who he was there. Eventually, when my fingers started to ache around the steering wheel, I forced myself to move. I turned the key. The engine coughed back to life. As I pulled away, I took one last look at the blue house in the rearview mirror. It looked peaceful, ordinary. If you drove past without knowing, you'd think, nice place, Lucky family? I drove in silence, the radio finally off, the streets of Sydney sliding past in a blur of dark and light. I crossed the bridge, the harbor stretching beneath me, ink black and indifferent. Something inside me had shifted. I had always thought heartbreak would feel like a bomb. Loud, catastrophic, instant. But as I drove home to the house I'd shared with Andrew for nearly 40 years, I realized it felt more like a lens snapping into focus. Not rage, not hysteria, not yet. Clarity, sharp, cold, merciless clarity. By the time I pulled into our driveway on the North Shore, one thought sat in my mind with terrifying calm. This isn't a mistake. This isn't a fling. This is architecture. And tonight, for the first time, I'd seen the other half of the structure. I locked the car, walked up the familiar path to our front door, and stepped into the house that now felt like a beautifully decorated lie. I didn't cry. Instead, I went straight to the study, opened the bottom drawer of his desk where he kept old documents and random junk, and stared at the contents as if they'd rearrange themselves into answers. They didn't. But I knew, with a certainty that hummed under my skin, that the answers existed. In his laptop, in his files, in his phone, in that blue house on Jacaranda Street. I closed the drawer, straightened up, and looked at my reflection in the darkened window. For the first time in my marriage, I didn't see a wife. I saw someone preparing for war. When I woke up the next morning, the sunlight filtering through the blinds in our home on Sydney's North Shore looked foreign, as if it had crossed a world I no longer belonged to. For almost 40 years, I'd believed my home was the safest place on earth. That morning, it felt like evidence. Andrew was already gone, of course. There was a note on the kitchen counter written in his familiar slanted hand. Morning meeting. Didn't want to wake you. Love you. Love. Again. He wielded that word like a shield, a bandage for the wounds he inflicted. I stared at the note for a long time before tearing it neatly in half. I didn't cry. Not yet. Tears were for confusion, and I was done being confused. By noon, I was sitting at his desk, the one he insisted be our shared space in the study. I had dusted that desk for years. I knew every drawer, every pen, every file, except one. The bottom drawer, the one that always stuck slightly when you pulled it, clicked open too easily this time. Inside, under a pile of financial reports and old receipts, was a small, matte black phone. No case, no stickers, no scratches. The kind of phone someone used but didn't live with. I pressed the power button. The screen lit up instantly. No password. It opened into a world I didn't recognize. Text messages, pictures, contact lists full of strangers. One thread stood out. Sienna. I tapped it, and the air left my lungs. Sienna. Luca's fever finally broke. Isla slept through the night. Andrew. That's a relief. Give them both a kiss from Dad. Sienna. Love you, Daniel. Andrew. Always. Daniel. I scrolled back through the messages, and the timeline unraveled like a confession. Birthdays, anniversaries, family trips. 12 years of a parallel life. I saw photos of him carving pumpkins for a school fair, holding a baby wrapped in a pink blanket. In one, he stood barefoot on a white sand beach with Sienna, wind in their hair, eyes soft with love. Palm trees, turquoise water, the caption, "Our forever begins here, Whit Sundays." That weekend, he'd told me he was at a leadership retreat in Melbourne. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was floating above my own body. Watching this woman, me, sitting there, reading proof that her husband was not two-faced. He was two men. Andrew Lawson. Daniel Hayes. Two identities, two families, two worlds. The part of me that wanted to scream was silenced by something colder. Curiosity. I wasn't ready to confront him. Not yet. Before you destroy someone, you must first understand their structure, where they're weakest. And Andrew, or Daniel, had just given me the blueprint. That night, after he fell asleep beside me, snoring softly like nothing had shifted, I opened his laptop. The password was still my birthday. That felt ironic now. He used me to protect his secrets. I didn't have to dig far. There were bank statements, spreadsheets, files labeled innocuously, Hayes_consulting_expenses.xlsx client_list.docx_returns_Hayes.pdf Hayes. The name Sienna had used. Every file was precise, professional, clean, too clean. He wasn't sloppy, he was brilliant. He'd built a second life not out of impulse, but architecture. I copied everything to a flash drive and slipped it into the pocket of my robe. When I glanced at him sleeping, I saw not a man, but a crime scene. The next morning, I called an old acquaintance, Ray Nolan, a retired investigator who had once helped Ethan with a messy corporate dispute. He owed me a favor. When he arrived, I made coffee and forced myself to sound calm. "I need you to find out everything about someone named Daniel Hayes," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "You think Andrew's cheating?" "No," I replied. "Cheating would be a mercy." Within 48 hours, he called back. "Maggie," he said, his voice low, careful. "You need to sit down." Ray had found marriage records, legal ones, for Daniel Hayes and Sienna Brooks, dated 12 years ago, filed in Queensland. A matching birth certificate for their son, Luca. Another for the baby, Isla, born 6 months ago at Royal Prince Alfred Hospital. The same place I'd given birth to our daughter Chloe decades earlier. He'd also found property records, a house in Sydney's northern suburbs under the Hayes name, a beachfront apartment on the Gold Coast, a cabin in the Blue Mountains, all bought in cash. "Is it possible," I whispered, "that he married her while still married to me?" "It's not possible," Ray said. "It's certain." That evening, I poured a glass of Shiraz and stared at the framed photo of our wedding on the mantel. I didn't recognize the people in it anymore. I replayed every detail of the last decade, every business trip, every delayed flight, every canceled anniversary dinner. He hadn't been unfaithful. He had been faithful to another family. I thought of Sienna, the woman in the blue robe. She wasn't the villain. She was a victim, too. Because in her story, I was the ghost. The wife who died years ago. Ray confirmed it. Sienna believes Daniel Hayes' first wife died in a car accident 15 years ago. He even filed a death certificate. A death certificate. My own. That night, I vomited until I couldn't breathe. When I looked at myself in the mirror, the woman staring back was pale, hollow, but not broken. Not yet. The next morning, Andrew came home with flowers, white lilies, my favorite, or the favorite of the woman he thought I still was. He kissed my cheek. "Morning, love." His voice was smooth, practiced, unshakable. The mask fit perfectly. "Rough night?" I asked. He smiled. "Long meetings?" He didn't even blink. I smiled back. It was almost admirable. How easily he lied. Almost. I told no one for a week. Then, one evening, I called Ethan. "Can you come home?" I said simply. When he arrived, I placed the flash drive and the printed documents in front of him. His face hardened with every page. By the time he reached the marriage certificate, he looked up. No longer my son, but my lawyer. "We're going to destroy him," he said. "Not yet," I replied. "He's not ready to lose everything. I want him to think he's safe." When Chloe heard, she didn't speak for a full minute. Then she whispered, "He made us live in a lie." Her voice cracked. "I'll handle the media, Mom. When this explodes, I'll make sure he can't hide behind his name." Ray helped me open a private file. Ethan began quietly freezing accounts. Carefully, legally. Chloe built a media timeline. We weren't a family anymore. We were an operation. Every night I rehearsed my performance. Smiles, laughter, softness. The perfect wife returned. He believed it. Of course he did. After all, he'd built his life on believing his own lies. Sometimes when he kissed me goodnight, I almost pitied him. Almost. Because I knew that soon, very soon, he would come home to find everything gone. His empire, his name, his legacy. And when that day came, I would look him in the eyes and say, "I'm not your ghost, Andrew. I'm the woman you buried alive, and I just dug my way out." The morning after I chose war, Sydney felt newly mapped. Every traffic light, every foyer camera, every smiling concierge a potential witness. If Discovery was about waking up, the setup was about choreography, timing, angles, exits. You don't topple a double life by accident. You script it. I started small. Rituals. I made Andrew's coffee the way he liked it, kissed him at the door, texted him photos of dinners I never ate. Trust is a muscle. I kept his flexed. At lunch, I drove to the Harbor Light, a vaulted restaurant at Circular Quay that looked like a cathedral had learned to serve oysters with harbor views. Andrew had proposed hosting our 40th anniversary dinner there months ago. I called the events manager and upgraded the reservation. Private room, projector, wireless audio. "A short film," I said, palms open, widow sincere. "A surprise for my husband." She smiled like a confessor. "Of course, Mrs. Lawson. We'll have a tech on standby." On the way out, I walked the perimeter of the room, ceiling vents, power rails, where the quartet would sit, where the champagne would crash. I took photos, measured the throw distance for a large screen. Later, when Ethan asked why, I sent him the photos with a single line. So the truth lands in every seat. We needed allies who wouldn't flinch. Legal, financial, narrative, theater. Ethan drew up ex parte asset freeze applications under Australian fraud and elder abuse provisions. Narrow enough to dodge early alarms, broad enough to lock doors the moment we turned the key. Chloe drafted a crisis comms cascade, embargoed statements, a prepared Q&A, controlled leaks to 3 outlets in Sydney with standards strict enough to keep the story factual and devastating. Ray brokered a meeting with a forensic accountant named Dahlia Tran. Dahlia wore neat braids, a gray suit, and a stare that treated numbers like suspects. In 48 hours, she traced an arterial system of shell companies feeding accounts in a Cayman sweep. Money skimmed from consulting contracts Daniel Hayes won using information Andrew Lawson shouldn't have had. I called Patricia Lawson, Andrew's sister. "He forged Mum's living trust," she said before I even asked. "I could never prove it. Tell me where to sign." 2 days later, she produced the original will from their father's safety deposit box, the one that placed most assets in a grandchildren's trust with an independent trustee. Andrew's probate filings told a different story. Now we had a felony with a bow. Finally, Sienna. I stared at her number for an hour. In her timeline, I was dead. When I called, I chose honesty and restraint. "My name is Maggie Lawson," I said. "I'm alive, and your husband is my husband." Silence. Then a breath that broke. I didn't ask for alliance. I offered protection for the children, and a path to separate herself from his crimes. She didn't commit. She didn't hang up. Sometimes that's enough. At dinner, I floated an idea as if it were an apology. "What if we made our anniversary grand?" I asked. "Invite the partners, the board, the kids." His eyes brightened the way liars glow when the audience expands. "A vow renewal?" he offered. "Exactly," I said. "Let's make a film. Our story." He took my hand. "I'd like that." Behind my smile, a counter. T14 days. That night, while he showered, I placed a tiny voice recorder beneath the driver's seat of his BMW, magnetized and invisible. I wasn't searching for romance. I wanted logistics, names, schedules, the vocabulary of guilt. In the morning, I slid on my wedding ring and told myself it was armor. The recorder gave us patterns, names, clients, mates, a builder named Mick Holt. Times, Wednesdays at 4 for kids' footy training. Code phrases, Brisbane Project meant the Blue House. Leadership Retreat meant Sienna's bed. One clip was an accidental gift. Andrew on Bluetooth braying laughter with Mick. "Paper's bulletproof," Mick said. "Hayes is a ghost." "Ghosts don't get audited," Andrew replied. Chloe underlined the line in our media brief. Memes would do the rest. The plan had 4 columns: legal, financial, narrative, theater. Legal. Ethan filed to freeze the joint accounts at 9:28 p.m. on anniversary night, 10 minutes before dessert, triggered by a clerk who owed him a favor and a fax that wasn't a fax, so much as a timed release. Patricia's affidavit accompanied a criminal referral on the forged trust. Dahlia's work paper bundle went to an Australian taxation office contact whose voicemail said only first name and badge number. Financial. Dahlia cued instructions to recall transfers from the offshore sweep under constructive trust theory, attaching exhibits of commingled funds from my inheritance. It wasn't guaranteed, it was sharp. Narrative. Chloe booked a quiet hotel suite 2 blocks from Circular Quay and named the folder Sea Glass for pretty shards that used to cut. She prepared 3 statements: before, during, after. "When you control the verbs," she told me, "you control the weather." Theater. My job. Pull air into lungs once the room forgets how. I cut a 3-minute reel of our life. Birthdays, barbecues, cheap first flat in a western suburb. Then spliced it with the raw material I'd gathered: Andrew Daniel on a Gold Coast beach with Sienna, ultrasounds inscribed "for the best dad," junior footy footage where he shouts, "Luca!" with a pride I recognized and didn't. The final slate was a title card. 38 years, 2 names. Under it, the audio. Andrew's voice from the recorder. "She never suspects a thing. Trust me, after so many years she's blindly trusting. It's almost pathetic how easy it is." I exported 3 redundant copies and hid them like relics. One on a locked USB in my clutch, one ingested to the Harbor Lights AV rack under MLAWSON_ANNIV_FINAL. One airdropped to Chloe's laptop. If a wire failed, the truth would still arrive. People think rehearsals are for words. They're for collapse. 3 nights before the dinner, I stood in my wardrobe in a blood-red dress I'd chosen for its refusal to apologize. I practiced breathing while I pressed play on the track that would end our marriage. My hands shook. I let them. Then again. Less tremor. Again. Stillness. I practiced the first glance at Andrew when the room turned. I practiced not sprinting to the exit when shame tried to deputize my legs. I practiced the voice I'd use when I said, "38 years is a long time to be dead." When I could say it without tasting metal, I texted Chloe, "I'm ready." On the eve of the anniversary, Andrew insisted on grilling steaks in the backyard, as if smoke could season memory. He opened a Barossa Cabernet we'd been saving for nothing in particular. "Nearly 4 decades, he said, clinking my glass. "You still knock me flat." "You've always been good with stories," I said, smiling just enough. He laughed. "You'll love tomorrow's surprise." "I bet I already do." He turned the meat, humming the tune he always hummed when he'd spent the afternoon elsewhere. A month ago, the sound would have flayed me. Now it filed me sharper. That night, he fell asleep fast, content and heavy. I lay awake and listened to the quiet between breaths. The longest sound I would ever forgive. Morning, T0. 3 p.m. Ethan delivers signed embargo packets to court clerk, files asset freeze orders to trigger at 9:28 p.m., 4:30 p.m. Dahlia sends referrals bundle to ATO and State Fraud Squad, 6:45 p.m. Chloe preps press brief, embargo lifts at 9:45 p.m., 7:10 p.m. I arrive at the Harbor Light to sound check the reel. Tech labels our input HDMI-A, 7:40 p.m. Guests begin arriving, string quartet cues. Our love is here to stay. 9:20 p.m. Andrew's toast, 9:30 p.m. I press play. I slid the blood-red dress over skin that remembered paintbrushes and turpentine. I fastened my mother's pearls at my throat, legacy resting exactly where breath begins. In the foyer mirror, a woman looked back who had learned how to build a stage and how to burn one. "Hello, Maggie," I told her. "Stick your landing." The harbor light was already lit like a promise when we pulled up. The valet opened my door as if the night belonged to me. Maybe it did. Inside, candlelight threw halos on glass, voices braided, people hugged. Andrew held my hand too tightly, staking claim. "You're luminous," he murmured. "I can't wait to show you what I've planned." "I can," I said, smiling. He didn't hear it. At 9:18, the quartet tapered into silence as servers floated desserts towards the kitchen to hold. Andrew's business partner, Declan Ward, raised a glass across the room. Patricia watched me from near the exit, her face set like a seal on a document. Andrew rose, tapping his flute with a knife, a clear, crystalline chime. Phones lifted. He began the speech I could mouth along with him, about storms and harbors and a woman who saved his life. The room softened. That's what charm does. It anesthetizes. "Maggie," he said, my name old and new in his mouth, "will you do me the honor of—" I stood, took the mic, and let my voice ride the room. "I have a film," I said. "It's our story." I looked at the tech. He nodded. Lights dimmed. The first frame bloomed. For 3 minutes, the room watched a marriage, then a secret. The laughter that began at our cheap flat in Parramatta went winter cold at the Whitsundays. Gasps started like drizzle and became weather. On the last slate, 38 years, 2 names. Andrew's voice filled the dark. "She never suspects a thing. Trust me, after so many years, she's blindly trusting. It's almost pathetic how easy it is." Glasses shattered in a synchronous sting. Someone whispered, "Oh my God," and thought they were quiet. I turned to Andrew. For the first time in months, he looked uncomposed, a man without blocking. He reached for me. Ethan stepped between us. "Don't," my son said. Servers froze. The quartet's cellist wept without sound. Patricia covered her mouth and then steadied her hand, as if signing something invisible in the air. I lifted the mic once more. 38 years is a long time to be dead," I said, and placed a pen and a stack of papers on the linen. Irrevocable settlement, stipulated division, waiver of claims. The clock above the bar ticked to 9:28. Somewhere across Sydney, a clerk pressed send. Across 3 banks, accounts froze. Across 2 agencies, flags turned red. At our table, Chloe's phone lit with a single word from her team: live. Andrew looked at the pen as if it were a weapon. In a way, it was. He took it with a hand that had steadied our children's bikes and signed with the same flourish he'd used to build a second world. The ink pooled at the edge of his name like a tide that wouldn't return. I didn't touch him. I didn't gloat. The room was doing that for me, in silence and in stares, and in the geometry of people stepping back. I turned to the guests, the partners, the friends, the witnesses, and set the mic down. "Dessert is on me," I said. "Justice, too." Outside, the night had the nerve to be beautiful. Somewhere, a siren rose and fell. I walked to the curb in the sound of my own heels, climbed into the car beside my daughter, and exhaled the longest breath of my life. Behind us, inside the harbor light, a man finally met the gravity he'd been evading. Ahead of us, a suite 2 blocks away waited with warm lamps, water, tissues, a table, a pen, and a woman in a navy coat holding a baby. The stage had been set. The house had come down. The night split cleanly in 2, before the video and after the silence. By the time we stepped into the cool air outside the harbor light, Sydney's skyline had turned into a camera flash, 1,000 eyes opening at once. "Mom, they're already posting it," Chloe whispered, scrolling through her phone. Headlines bloomed like fire across the screen. Sydney executives double life exposed during 45th anniversary gala. 2 names, 1 man, Andrew Lawson unmasked in viral footage. I stared at the glowing city and realized this wasn't just scandal, it was justice going live. In the car, Ethan fielded calls from lawyers and journalists. His tone was pure steel. No comment until filings are processed. Yes, the evidence is authentic. No, my client won't appear publicly. My client, not my mother. Not tonight. I understood. There's a line between family and defense, and tonight we were crossing all of them. At 6 a.m., Ray texted, "He's at Surrey Hills Station." Walked in with his solicitor, voluntarily surrendered. By noon, fraud investigators had seized Andrew's office servers, while the ATO locked down company accounts. Offshore wires froze mid-transfer, hanging in digital limbo. Television anchors repeated my name like a verdict. Maggie Lawson, wife of Sydney executive Andrew Lawson, whose alternate identity, Daniel Hayes, has been confirmed by legal records. Every syllable sounded like freedom spelled wrong. An op-ed called me the quiet fury that toppled an empire. I didn't read it twice. Sienna moved into a smaller apartment closer to her sister on the Central Coast. We met once a week, signing paperwork over coffee, 2 widows of the same lie. Luca drew a picture once, 3 people standing under a sun, him, his baby sister, and Maggie. When I asked why, he said, "Because you saved us from the bad dream." I kept that drawing. A month later, Patricia showed up unannounced, holding a box of old photos. "He stole these from Mum's house," she said. "Figured they belonged with someone who remembers who we were." We sat on my veranda, wine glasses sweating in the late summer heat. She looked at me carefully. "You know, he used to say you were too kind to survive him." I laughed softly. "He was half right." Then she added, "He's calling from Silverwater. Says he wants closure." I looked out towards the gum trees. "Closure's expensive," I said. "He can't afford it." 3 months later, the trial began in the District Court of New South Wales. It wasn't dramatic like on television, just quiet devastation. The prosecution laid out timelines, documents, tax evasion, marriage records. Sienna testified, trembling but steady. When they called me to the stand, the courtroom held its breath. The prosecutor asked, "Mrs. Lawson, why didn't you go to the police sooner?" I said, "Because women like me are taught to wait until we have proof. And when I finally had it, I wanted him to see it too." The jury took 4 hours. Guilty. 5 years. No parole. The night the verdict came down, I went home alone. The house smelled of lemon oil and absence. I walked room to room, turning off lights like closing chapters. When I reached the bedroom, I opened his wardrobe, removed the last suit, and left the hanger swinging, an echo of something that used to fill the space. Then I took the wedding photo off the wall and placed it face down in a drawer, not out of hatred, out of mercy, the kind you reserve for ghosts. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from Silverwater Correctional Center. The handwriting was neat, contained, the same way he'd written grocery lists. "Maggie, I watched the footage again. I still don't know when I stopped loving you. Maybe it's because I never stopped loving myself more." I folded it once, then again, until it fit inside my palm. I didn't reply. Years passed. Enough that my hair grew whiter and my paintings shifted from stormy blues to softer golds. One mild autumn afternoon, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, a young man stood on my steps, holding an envelope. He had Sienna's eyes and Andrew's jaw. "Are you Mrs. Lawson?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He nodded slowly. "I'm Luca." He extended the envelope. The handwriting on it was older, trembling. "It's from him," Luca said. "He died 6 months ago, cancer. He asked that I deliver this to you myself." Have you read it? I asked. No. He said it was yours to open first. Inside, the letter was short. No performance, no excuses. Maggie, if you're reading this, I am gone. And perhaps that's the first honest sentence I've ever written to you. I spent my last years watching the world I built crumble and realizing you were the only thing real in it. I don't ask forgiveness. I only ask that you tell my son who I was. Not the monster, not the husband, just the man who finally understood what truth costs. Andrew. I folded it again until it disappeared into my fist. I can't tell you who he was, I said softly to Luca, but I can tell you who he became. We sat by the window, sunlight sketching gold across the floorboards. He leafed through a stack of my canvases, eyes wide. Mum says you saved us, he said, and that you're the reason I want to study art. I saved myself, I corrected gently. You just came along with the light. He smiled. Either way, thank you. We talked for hours about color, truth, how art can hold both pain and forgiveness without choosing between them. When he rose to leave, he hesitated. He wanted to be remembered, Luca said. Should I? Yes, I answered, but remember him as a lesson, not a wound. That evening, I walked down to the foreshore, to a small lookout where you can see the harbor bridge framed against the sky. The water moved below, dark and patient. I opened my hand, looked at the folded paper one last time, then let it fall. It floated for a moment, caught the light, then slipped beneath the surface, not sinking, not drowning, just going. Back in my studio, I began one final painting, not large, not grand. A young man standing before an older woman, a sketchbook between them. Behind them, a window full of morning light over Sydney Harbor. When I finished, I signed it in the corner with quiet certainty. For Luca, so truth can begin again. I stepped back, brush still in hand, eyes soft, smile calm. The world outside hummed with life, unbroken, alive. And for the first time, I whispered, not to a ghost, but to myself. The story is complete.